Manhattan chapter. Good evening, ladies. We're just going to get started. On behalf of our board of directors and members, I welcome you to our program this evening, Voter Suppression and its Impact on Black Voters. I want to thank the National Council of Negro Women for partnering with us on this really important discussion. And, just a little bit about, and why is this discussion important to us? Well, just a little bit about the coalition. The National Coalition of 100 Black Women Incorporated is a 40-year-old advocacy organization whose vision is that Black women and girls will live in a world where socioeconomic inequity does not exist. We advocate on behalf of Black women and girls to promote leadership development and gender equity in the areas of health, education, and economic empowerment. The Manhattan chapter specifically was chartered in 1992, and we are celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. So I would like now to introduce our moderator for this evening, Dr. Sonia Banks. And just to give her her due, because Dr. Banks is not just a member of the Public Policy Committee and immediate past president of the Manhattan chapter, but she also does have a day job. So Dr. Banks is a clinical and behavioral change consulting psychologist. She has over 25 years of experience in private practice and organizational impact. Her expertise lies in her ability to apply research trends to relationship science in her work with adolescents, couples, families, communities, and organizational teams to support and build sustainable learning systems that advocate for their human potential. She has addressed thousands of people in audiences, seminars on behavior change, health, and other topics. She's lectured, she's moderated at other forums, which is why it's so great to have her at this one. And she's also written several articles and co-authored the book, Silent Agreements. Dr. Banks is a doctorate and master's degree in clinical psychology from George Washington University and another master's in human resources management from the New School for Social Research. She has a bachelor's degree from Wellesley College. So Dr. Banks, let's dig in.
Let's dig in. Thank you for that. I often forget all of that when I'm thinking about myself. So it's kind of nice to have that summary, and that was very kind of you, Janera.
And I really tried to sum it up.
You did a good job. Yeah, it's just you work 24/7, when you're working on behalf of Black women, girls, and children. I'd like to ask my public policy chair, Shante Chambly, to do the honors this evening of reading the bio for our main expert in the field that's going to really take us through understanding what's happening to Black women, girls, what's happening in America around voter registration in our cities. And so I feel that we need to truly get a sense of the fact that this is going to be a real conversation, looking at the issues that keep us up at night and the issues that can promote and develop the legacies that we work so hard to create in our lives. So Shante, would you do the honors for us?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sonia. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Xamayla Rose. She is the Deputy Public Advocate of Civic and Community Empowerment. Xamayla is responsible for shaping the Office of the Public Advocate programming and policies related to infrastructure for immigrant communities, electoral processes, democratic participation, support, and civic engagement, including census outreach and inclusion and support for diverse populations. Prior to joining the Office of the Public Advocate, Xamayla was and continues to be known as a community organizer, government and non-for-profit professional who leads efforts in civic participation, workforce development, and anti-poverty initiatives.
And that's just a capstone. So thank you for that. So on behalf of the Sisters of the National Coalition of Negro Women, our partner in this program, and the Sisters of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, we are grateful for those of you that did not think it was robbery to take another hour after your long day to get involved in conversation to support our community. So Jamila, let's just start talking from a larger view to the smaller view. Can you talk a bit about what voter suppression really is? We keep hearing the term framed depending on the party and the preference of the person that's talking. But can you summarize for those of us getting ready to engage, how do you define voter suppression?
Sure. Thank you for that question. Before I even get into answering it, I also just wanted to thank the National Council of Negro Women. The Manhattan chapter happens to be a member of the Flatbush chapter, and also to thank the National Coalition of 100 Black Women for inviting our office to participate in this vital conversation. And I think the first question is perfect, because many times when people think about voter suppression and they think about their right to vote and who has rights to vote and when we can vote, they see imagery of an old America with guns drawn and people fighting and things like that, and they say, well, we don't have voter suppression in New York State, or we don't have voter suppression in New York City. But really, when you're thinking about access to the ballot box, it's really about what laws are in place that are prohibiting or not allowing people to vote or get access as easily as they should. So sometimes it may not be as direct as blocking a poll site with a AR-15 or with a gun, or specifically charging a poll tax, or it may not be as specific as some other ways that we've seen done in the South and during the Jim Crow era. But it could be something as simple as not having language access and translation services for people who are in New York City and in New York State. And we know for a fact in our state alone, and not our state, in our city alone, we have about 1.7 million voters who speak another language and who are considered limited English proficiency, and yet still only 300,000 of those individuals are allowed to get like translation and interpretation services based on the current federal Voting Rights Act and the laws that are in place. So there are ways that our systems can be our voting rights can be expanded, and we can increase franchise and access to the ballot for a myriad of people without necessarily thinking about some of the violent history of this country. But we have to keep that in context, because that is that's the backdrop, that's the backdrop of it. And we're coming from a really violent time. And so it's not okay for us to just keep the standard of, okay, yes, we've had the Civil Rights Act passed and we had Voting Rights Acts passed and now we can vote, so it should be easy. No, it's still not easy, and we need to go even further than that. And I can talk about some other ways where even New Yorkers, our ability to access the ballot has been limited, and I can get into voting reforms and all of that, but I know this is a conversation, so I don't want to just go off for a whole 5 minutes.
Oh, you're doing fine, because I want to hit it right down the middle of the fairway here. At the end of the day, when you talk about the actual laws in place that limit anyone, particularly our immigrants, particularly those that may have various language constraints or literacy around the voting process, right? How are those laws dictated, and how do we, as women, men, whoever's listening, have a control or impact on those laws? Because I think I'd like to follow that train of thought that you brought up.
Sure. So for the one I spoke about previously, that's like a floor. So the law is a floor. It's the Federal Voting Rights Act, which pretty much says that we have to provide translation for languages that are in like the top, I think it's 7 or the top 10 languages in our city. And so we've done that. However, because New York City is unique and very different from other areas, what we find is that there are still people who may not fall into those top categories of, the most populous languages, the most popular languages. But at the same time, they still need those services. They still need interpretation. So that's like the immigrant piece. So
if I speak Bengali, right? If I speak Bengali, is there a translation for me? Or am I below the top 7 or in the top 7, depending on my zip code?
Bengali, I believe, is not translated. I believe French, English, Spanish, Haitian Creole is translated. And the city has done some more work to expand additional languages as well. I believe Russian is included. A lot of the continental African languages are not included. The West African languages are not included unless the person speaks French.
Yes.
And so it definitely impacts the Black community. But again, that's because the law is the floor. But New York City has done some additional things. So when we're talking about how can legislation assist and impact access to the ballot, we can do that by increasing access, by passing laws that says, instead of looking at the floor, which is like the federal limit, New York City has rights, you know, and the power to increase that to 12 languages or 15 languages or 20 languages, which would then trigger funding to come down a stream to provide interpretation and translation. That's just one thing. Another area where we've seen some discrepancies, or should I say, a disadvantage for people in New York City, specifically in communities of color, is in one specific policy that we have that's called the wrong church rule, which means if you go to a poll site that maybe it may be not your correct poll site and you fill out an affidavit ballot, those ballots can then be thrown out afterwards. And it's called the wrong church rule, and it's been moving through the state legislature recently, and our office has spoken about it, and other advocates are speaking about it as well, because what we found is that in New York State, about 13,000 ballots are disqualified, and these are from eligible voters, but they just happen to go to the wrong poll site. They cast an affidavit ballot, and of those 13,000, more than 60% of them are from New York City, and of course they're from communities of color. So the lack of information, and sometimes the fact that people don't have education, and the fact that our laws are not flexible enough to provide a safety net for those votes, for people who may have incorrect information and can't go to another place and just cast their affidavit ballot, you know, that prevents them from their votes counting. So we've seen that as well. And there are other things. There are other things as well that happen in New York City.
I mean, I'm typing as you're talking. I mean, because I want to get to the top things that really we can impact, right? Through some action, which I know you're going to take us to. But I can imagine the rage, right? The disempowerment, the frustration of going to a site, you think, right? I have a church right down the block from me. It's where I voted my entire life. And then if I had to go there, I would just vote there, right? I would never, ever think that there was anything that could get in the way of my voting, or if the door was closed, I literally would be at ends to know where to go. So when you go to that wrong church, I don't know if anybody else is familiar, the wrong church law, how on earth do we get ahead of some of these, or what can we do to become more aware of this list that you're going through? And you've given me two. Is there another one that you're thinking absolutely we need to pay attention to?
I mean, there are other policies, of course, that we would like to see in the state. One of them is for returning citizens, and that's specifically the population that is has interacted with our criminal justice system.
Yes.
And so they are returning home after being incarcerated, serving their time. And we did see recently the former governor, he created an executive order that would then allow people to they don't have to, they can vote, they can re-register to vote and cast their votes if they were on parole. Previously, they were not able to do that. But even just the process for them to get that information, people are like, when they're coming out, they're not getting that information. Even when you try to go to different websites to get the details, how do I do that? Where do I register to vote? Can I register to vote? That information is just so inaccessible, and so even though their rights had been restored, they had their rights restored, they weren't able to really access it. And sometimes what people say is, well, people who are just coming out of jail and serving time and they're on parole, who told you they want to vote anyway? They're not accessing it because they don't want to vote. But that's not actually true.
No.
The information is there.
Right. And access is everything. So let's talk a little bit about that. I feel like I'm getting clear. I hope everyone participating is that you can see that the real challenge is for us is in the law, right? It's in knowing what the policy is, knowing what the floor to the law is, and knowing who's doing what to move things forward. So as we look at voter suppression and we're trying to shift the mindset, as you're saying, so we hold the history in one hand and we hold the reality that we currently live in the other, and we balance those poles, we're in the middle, right? We're in the middle of trying to figure out how and what to make our priority, determination, and decision when we look at voter suppression. What is it that we need to do in terms of myths, right? And you're hitting on a lot of them, that we need to think about as a collective body that practice advocacy and education? Are there myths that we need to help destroy or dissemble or take apart that you think are impacting why there is not a lot of concern or uproar sometimes when we talk about voter suppression?
I think, well, my opinion on that is people have preconceptions of, like, people have their own ideas of what is a problem and what is a priority. And the
Right.
truth is, throughout COVID and the pandemic, our communities have been ravished by, disease and death disproportionately from any other community out there. And what we're seeing is, yes, voter education is important and civic engagement is important, but at the same time, people are still juggling multiple things. So we really need strategies that cut through the noise, and so it's like, it's not just about, like, sometimes people will say, well, how did you not know that? How did you not know that we were having a special election? Why don't you know that these people are the candidates for your district? How come you don't know what assembly district you live in? People are worn out and
That's
they're
right.
tired,
That is so true.
and for those of us who have that knowledge, it's really important that we share it. I think forums like these are important. I was watching a special, I think I was watching the news the other night, and they had shared that the whole Ukraine crisis, and there was this young woman, a young African-American woman, and she just turned the whole Ukraine crisis into her own vernacular, and she explained the whole thing, and it went viral on TikTok. And it's like, you would think that people aren't interested. People are interested, but sometimes we have to discuss things in ways and break it down in ways that people understand. And we can't speak up here. Sometimes we have to bring it, in a way and in a forum that everybody can attend and everybody can hear. And that's not always just going to be on the media, on CNN or MSNBC or wherever those places are. It's going to be these kitchen conversations. It's going to be in our living room conversations, NCNW. And then we're going to have to go out there and speak to people. So yes, we have to stay engaged, and we have to continue to educate people every day, let them know that these things are priorities, these things are happening. And then we also have to just show up, for rallies. For those of us who can do that, I happen to work as an advocate. So of course I can be at rallies in the daytime and things like that. The rest of you, not so much. You'll be working 9 to 5 or 10 to 6, whatever. But, we stay vigilant, and we stay thinking about the ways that our engagement can impact women, can impact girls. I mean, there's so many different pieces of legislation. Everything really impacts us, from economic development, paid leave, and all these different things. But at the foundation of it all is literally our voting rights.
Exactly. So talk about that, because as we're looking at which ways to turn with the noise, right? And we're hearing about legislation that's actually closing the door in places, right? And redistricting that's happening, which is like, God bless Adrian, this is a hard job and there's going to be a lot of work involved in it. How do we set ourselves up for success at this point? Yes, the COVID impact, the grief, the noise, our economic distractions, but they still leave us in a place where if we're not focused, a lot of what we've gained can be lost. When we hear about the laws that are getting either misunderstood or not fully explored and taught to us, they can end up harming us. So what strategy would you offer listeners that are looking at getting more informed or educated? Do we do it by our zip code? Do we do it by our district? Do we go smaller and more focused? Or do we go wider and more general to have impact as people that do want to see a resolve?
If we're talking about individual people, I think the best thing that individuals can do to keep themselves on top of what's happening is to connect to other larger organizations. That's the best way to do it, because no one, the information is not being filtered down in a way that the average everyday person walking on the street about to catch the bus or jump in the train can understand it. So we have to connect to organizations that are doing advocacy work, that are doing civic engagement. There's so many in our particular city. I mean, some of them are, historic organizations like NCNW and 100 Black Women. There's also like NAACP and all these others, the Urban League. But then there's also very, very local advocacy groups. Depending on what borough that you're in, usually you can see them. They're out in the streets during when it's coming up to an election. They're usually out there handing out information, doing voter registration drives. They're doing all that stuff, and we really need to continue to do all of that. One of the things that I tell people all the time is that, if we're not careful, our freedom really wasn't free. And if we're not careful, we could easily go back into, the old days, because at the rate that we're going in this country and the energy that we're seeing coming from certain areas, and of course I'm speaking in a nonpartisan way, but facts are facts.
Right.
You know, there's already been more than 30 bills introduced that are considered like bills that can promote voter suppression, and there's been more than 400 of those same types of bills already. I mean, about 30 bills are passed, and there's already more than 400 of those bills that have been drafted, and you know, for people to try to pass them through the different state legislatures all across the country. And so we really don't have much of a choice but to keep ourselves, to keep our eyes open and to keep our ears open and to listen. And I know we're hearing about the Freedom to Vote Act, we're hearing about the John Lewis Act, and people are like, well, what's that? You know, and really it's just a way to safeguard our democracy and make sure that some of the provisions that are already in place remain in place, you know, and cannot be taken away from us, but also to make sure that as some states are maybe more advanced in their ability to protect voting rights, that same standard is applied across the country to all states. And that's really what these new bills that we're seeing is about. And I can get into a little bit more about this.
We'd like a little bit more, because what's starting to happen around the kitchen table, right, and in the various meetings is this sense of fear, right? This cut straight, this fear, terror. So you have people saying, we've already lost. Black folk, okay, that were in the struggle, and their mamas were in the struggle, thinking that we've already lost, right? And I'm thinking that makes no sense to me, right? You can't say that. How are you going to say that? You say that with a whip on your back, with a chain around your neck. You're not down till you're down. But the fear and the terror is starting to psychologically impact how people are able, particularly women that I speak to, actually talk about these bills, right? So when I talk about strategies, I think you're right. Individuals joining organizations where you can get that fear replaced by not only faith, but an actual process, right? A way to actually go about it. What do you think about the notion of, if there are these 30 bills that have passed, if there are 400 more to come, if we can get the John Lewis Act through, if it is going through nationally, what do you think about a counter proposal, a counter approach? You know, rather than to wait to see what gets knocked down and then try to defend it, is there any conversation going on about putting together another strategy that doesn't put us in the reactive, but in the creative state beyond the current act you spoke about, the John Lewis Act? Is there any other effort underway?
Well, the two acts were combined, and that's the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Act.
Yeah,
and,
I actually call them one. I apologize.
No, it's fine. You said it right. And then as for, is there a counter strategy? I can't speak to other states because I'm not there. But I know that in New York State, our legislators and Latrice Walker, who is the chair of the Elections Law Committee in the New York State Assembly, is a phenomenal, brilliant Black woman. And she has been putting in the work in the New York State Assembly on voting reforms over the last few years. And then we have another brilliant senator, who's Senator Zelnor Myrie, who's the state chair of the Elections Committee in the New York State Senate. And between those two powerhouses, we have been seeing a ton of voting reforms happening in New York State, things that other states have been doing for a long time, like early voting. People have been early voting forever. That's another way to increase to give people access to the ballot, by allowing them to vote at least 10 days, some places maybe longer, before the election. And when we're talking about the impact on Black women and young people, that's a major game changer. I can't tell you the amount of women I've spoken to, because typically, many of us are head of household, and you're working all day. And of course, the law says that you can take a certain amount of time off to vote. But yeah, that's nice if you work near where you live, because your poll site is right near your house and not necessarily near your job. Right. So that woman who's working in the Bronx, but who lives in Brooklyn, and she's 2 hours away, that small space of time that the employer gives you is not helpful. Right. So being able to vote on another day at a different time in the evening and those types of things was really, really a game changer. And that law passed in 2019, the New York State Legislature. We also had other ways that, what else did we increase? We did the early voting. We also increased access to voting by mail. And that was through the executive order that was done during the pandemic, which changed the excuses that you could use to actually apply for an absentee ballot and cast your ballot safely in the pandemic. So that's the case with that. We also made some additional changes to our election laws, which allowed us to fix ballots, because since people weren't accustomed to, because New York State, we really weren't submitting absentee ballots at that frequency and of that volume. And a lot of people who had never done it before were doing it now for the first time, and they were making mistakes. They were submitting their ballots. They forgot to sign the back. Now, because of the laws that were passed by, again, those two powerhouses, Zelda Murray and Latrice Walker and the state legislators, we have a mechanism in place where people can now reconcile. So if there's an issue with your ballot, it can be reconciled. And that's critical.
That's
That's
huge.
really, really, that's huge.
That's huge.
And the devil's in the details. People don't really know about all those reforms, but those things are happening. And then I think one of the most progressive things that I've seen the state do so far is introduce the New York State John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And that's the state's own version of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Again, that's Latrice Walker and Zelda Murray. It has not passed yet, but we are hoping that it passes in the near future. The state legislature is in session now, and they're working on that. So there's so many ways that states can move forward,
right,
with progressive policies. And ultimately what you want to see is that the policies that you create make it easier for people to get to the ballot box. And also that we're making sure that we're enshrining in the state's constitution.
That's right.
And protecting people's right to vote.
That's right. So that it stays beyond this phase. What can we do when I hear legislators are meeting and it hasn't passed yet? That's where the organizations that we are members are wanting to help. What do we need to do? We normally contact our legislator. We send our letters. We say, this is what we want. Not that you need it from us, because you've got it from us, but so that you have it for the people that you need it for, as you have to move and have impact on that vote in those after meeting conversations, before meeting conversations, and relationships that we know our legislators and electeds have to have among themselves to get this done. What can we do collectively and individually to help move that legislation through our own state?
I think for that, we can take a page out of our old school books, and it's like we have to be present. All of us won't be able to rally, and all of us won't be able to march, right?
Right.
But some of us will write letters, and some of us will send postcards, some of us will call. There are days, and for those of us who are more familiar with like local activism and organizing, there are days that are planned, days of action, where they'll say, it's lobby day. We're going up to Albany, and we're going to literally talk with each legislator and figure out, there's a list. Here are the ones who support this bill. Here are the ones who have not signed on yet. Guess whose door we're knocking on? The people who have not signed the bill yet. There's also opportunities to show up in places and amplify it, so that media can pick it up. Sometimes people are more performative. They may do something. I mean, I'm not encouraging anyone to, do civil disobedience and get arrested if that's not what they want to do. But sometimes people do that. Do civil acts of civil disobedience, and they get civil disobedience, and they get arrested for the cause, to raise awareness about the issue.
That's right.
It's really just a process that we have to go through with every bill.
That's right.
There's negotiation that happens, but public pressure is really the driving force.
Yes.
And
talk to us about that. What's public pressure look like now? I know it's changed a bit. Are there new forms that we need to consider? That constant phone ringing. There's a couple of things that we do. What's public pressure look like? Getting on Facebook and telling people exactly what we think?
Public pressure can be so many different things. It could be getting on Facebook. It could be social media and digital actions.
Yes.
I've seen people do, what do they call, Twitter storms and things of that nature. We've seen it, like when the Freedom to Vote Act was up all across the country. People were tweeting and talking about it, and it was trending. And it's unfortunate that it didn't pass, because we haven't changed some of the rules, like the filibuster and stuff like that.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that we're less engaged. We're still engaged. And that's part of the process, but we can do it on social media, again, showing up in person educating people. Each of us can take a very different role, but that's what public pressure pretty much looks like.
Good, and it needs to stay there. Let's look at, I know, look, there are folks that are here, we're at 7:30 and we're going in this deep back and forth. And I know I've got committee and members here. I just want to open up the floor a little bit for some questions. Send them in the chat, come off mic, because this is really a real opportunity. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, we'll be watching this all play out on screen, right? In terms of what passes and what doesn't pass. We'll be sitting in our homes in the next 6 or 8 months talking about them, whoever them is, and us, whoever we are. And we don't want to pass up this opportunity to refine our personal and collective strategies. There are people that we know on the other side of the view. And back on the day, in the day, you know, Xamayla, you would be talking across opinions and you'd have heated conversations. And you would find that you'd put each other in different places at the end because it's all about trying to make sure democracy survives. What is really feeling like an impactful, and I will just call it out loud, attack, racist attack on those that are in the minority now, which are people that don't look like me. And the country is shifting. And I want to ask you some real bottom line questions. I hope you're putting some in the chat because, you know, I'll just keep going. Please do. What role do you think racism, any ism, sexism, and fear of losing power and control as the majority, as the, you know, forefathers, using language, that that plays a role in this whole kind of debacle right now? Where is the fear or the concern around that? Does racism has always had a role in shifting power, but why does it feel so diabolical now? And did I say too many things? Does anyone not think it feels diabolical? I think it feels diabolical. So I'm gonna just go ask my question.
It does, it does. And I mean, if we look at this country from the founding of it, like the right to vote, right, was only for wealthy white men, right?
Yes.
And then people fought for more rights, and then, you know, then it was women's suffrage, and then it was about race, and all of a sudden when we got to that point, it just became, it opened up a whole Pandora's box, and it became a whole new issue. And I just find, you know, if I could just speak a little freely, that the demographic makeup of this country is changing.
Yeah.
And it will be very different in the next 20 years. And we've seen people who don't want that change to take place violently try to protect it.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking about all of the things that we've seen in the past through Jim Crow and all of that stuff, or whether we're talking about as recent as January 6th,
right,
you know, at the US Capitol, we see that people are violently opposing the shifting demographics and everything that comes along with it, the shifting, the changing of the way that people think and view things. And there's just a major shift happening right now.
Right.
And for those of us who find ourselves on the side where we want to increase the franchise, we want to see more people of color voting, whether they're Black, whether they're, you know, poor, whether they're Asian American, Pacific Islander, or LGBTQI, or whatever. We want to see, we just want to make sure that the democracy exists and it is solid, and that we are able to come together as a people and vote in representatives that make the most sense to us and can support the policies that support working families and the working, you know, not just the top one wealthy, the top white wealthy percent, but everybody in this country, and we deserve that. You know, to see them even battle about the Build Back Better bill and all these other things. I mean, yes, race is a major part of it. It's like that's really what it's all about. But also it's about working families, you know, and just making sure that the powerful stay powerful and those who don't have remain without. And that's what we have to change. And that's what democracy and representation allows us to do. And somebody had put in the chat about the Supreme Court. Yes. And it's like, when we think about the Supreme Court, before we can even talk about Supreme Court and why we need to even pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, Advancement Act today, is we have to also think about how the Supreme Court comes to be. The Supreme Court, those are appointments.
That's
you know,
right.
and so part of the reason why we're in the position that we're in now, with these 400 bills being introduced and these 30 bills actually succeeding and passing, is because in 2013, because of the climate that had existed at that time, and the way that the Supreme Court was weighted, our Voting Rights Act that had passed in, I believe it was like 1965, was gutted. It was completely gutted. The pre-clearance portion of it was gutted. And for those who may not understand, the pre-clearance is the part that allows you to say, this change is happening in this municipality. We can do the research and analysis and see that it's going to directly impact this group negatively. Therefore, this rule or this change, this policy, this law cannot take effect. That is the portion of the voting rights, the Federal Voting Rights Act, that was gutted. Why? Of course, because there was a growing, the civic engagement was growing amongst a certain population. And the John Lewis Voting Rights Act would actually restore what was taken away. And there was a statistic that I saw when I was just doing some quick research and stuff, because you got all this stuff in your head, but it's not all organized. And I had seen that between 1970 and 2000, the Supreme Court actually had 1,000 objections to rule changes, laws, and things that different states and municipalities tried to do. And so pretty much those were objected by the Supreme Court. That is the power of the Supreme Court. And that is why who we elect to office is important, because they appoint Supreme Court nominees and people on the bench. And also that's why it's so important that Biden comes through on his promise and elects the first Black woman Supreme Court. Not elects, but appoints the first Black woman person to the Supreme Court, because representation does matter.
It does, and let's hope he's more successful than Clinton was. At the end of the day, the challenge that you speak of, and again, thank you, Nancy, for that question around the Supreme Court and its impact on voting rights. The challenge that you speak of is not only about race, but about class. And it's about, I think, an attempt to undo what's been the biggest fear or concern since the Civil War, right? You hear the talk about, remember what happened after the Civil War and what we were trying to build back, and how we've, shown up in our ability as Black folk to try to get some rights that would take us past the plantation and what the swing back was. And so the consideration that there's now this big fear that if the country is actually in the position where it could be a true democracy, it would change the notion of what the country really was operating as, which was more of a republic, right? And so it's almost like that wasn't the intention. We really didn't imagine it would ever be a true democracy. We imagined it would actually function like a republic. And so I think we're seeing some of that fear when I talk about diabolical, that America living up to its true tenets is very, very difficult. So any other questions? Shantae, Janera, we've got a great conversation going on here. And we know that as we listen to what we're learning, what we're figuring out is so significant that we cannot grow weary in well-doing. Shantae, you've taken your mic off. What are you bringing?
Yeah, I have a question. Our senior citizens, they, tend to be our biggest, voters. But what about the youth? What are we doing to get the youth engaged? What are we doing to educate them about the importance of, voting rights?
That's a really good question, Shantae, and that speaks to me, because I built my civic engagement career on working with young people and franchising them, and they are, when it comes to voter turnout, they have some of the lowest rates of voter turnout of the entire population. I mean, New York State is horrible, period. When it comes to voter turnout in this country, we're 48th. So there are 47 states ahead of us in terms of turnout, like actually going to the polls, even though people are registered. But when it comes to the younger population, our 18 through 29-year-olds turn out, I think maybe around 20-something percent, and sometimes a little higher, maybe between 20 and 30%. I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but it's low. It's one of the lowest, and the seniors come out at the really, really highest rates. And the young people coming out the lowest. One of the most progressive things that I've seen happen in the last few years was the voting reforms that I spoke about a little while ago, which was in 2019, and the state legislature allowed for pre-registration for young people ages 16. And that's really important because the data has shown over and over and over again that, when young people get engaged civically early and actually, register and probably cast their first ballot around 18, that they're more likely to stay engaged throughout the process. Getting young people, and keeping them engaged when they're on the college campus and figuring out the whole absentee ballot thing is a whole other story. But really, it starts in high school. And I know our city had their own programs for engaging young people and doing large scale voter registration. Our office even did about 700 young people in a day. And we've gone to different high schools and done it for the young people. In this pandemic, however, it's been much harder. We tried it virtually and it's not as successful. So we really do need additional strategies for engaging young people. And one of the main ones, which is like, this is more technical. And so this is not something that's sexy that people are talking about, but it really could change the game for voter registration for young people, because young people, for the most part, don't print. They don't own printers. Maybe their parents might have a printer, their parents may not have a printer. Assuming that everyone has a printer is thinking about this whole thing from a very privileged mindset. And with our state DMV currently, the way that you can register to vote online and working and doing things online is the way most younger people do things. They're less likely to walk into a Board of Elections, snatch up a voter registration form and fill it out and return it. They don't even know where the Board of Elections is, but they will log on to a Turbo Vote. They will log on to I forgot there's another one. There's a few of those things out there. The city uses Turbo Vote and a few, I think 2 others. But they can also, right now, unless they have a driver's license, they're not even eligible to go to DMV. Or if they don't have a driver's license or a state ID, they're not eligible to go to DMV and apply for their voter registration online. And so one of the things that we were fighting for about a year or two was to expand the city's capacity to create like an online voter registration system aside from the DMV, that where young people and others who maybe can just go in there and register to vote. That didn't necessarily happen, but what we did see recently happen in the state legislature is they recently passed automatic voter registration, which again was led by Latrice Walker. And what that would allow is for within certain agencies and within certain state agencies and agents like local agencies that people would typically interact with regularly, an HRA, these different types of organizations. Once you interact with those agencies, you would have to opt out to vote, but you would be automatically registered to vote. It's not every agency, but there is a list of a few agencies that would be a part of that. And so that's how we can see young people getting engaged earlier. One, through pre-registration, also through lowering the barrier to online registration by not forcing them or requiring them to have a driver's license in order to do that, and also through automatic voter registration. And young people can also serve on community boards now. That's been a law for a while. Most young people don't know about it, but it is something that they should take advantage of.
That's powerful. What a great response. That lowering the barrier is so essential to everybody. And that's something that we can help get the word out, talking about what can we do as organizations. That could be on the bottom of our flyers. It could be in our chats when we do our programs, constantly giving that information out, that you can go to these places and you have to opt out. I noticed that on DMV the other day myself. I was like, no, I'm already registered. And it just kept popping up and popping up. So I think these are going to be the filters that help to construct and support our society going forward. Where else can we encourage this automatic feed? I don't see why you can't get a voter registration card when you're born, get a daggone social security card when you're born. I mean, it's just like, if you are living in a democratic society, those are the 2 cards that you get tagged with. Boom, boom. Now you can take baby home, right? So we are going to keep fighting till we get to those essentials, right, for living. It's the tools to operate and the tools to support us. So any more questions? We've got another one. We did that already. Who else? Janera, do you have a call? Yes,
Yeah,
yes, please.
and I don't know if this is, and it's maybe getting into another bag of worms, but whenever we do talk about this, aside from you know, we talk, it just seems so obvious that this is all so bizarre and unfair, right? And there's a circus here, but I think the some of the big circus that I saw is the woman Crystal Mason from Texas, who right, who was a convicted. She was convicted. She served her time, right, I believe, and then she came out and she actually thought she could vote, and so she's registered. But now she's right, she's back in jail. I think that's the story. So it's a bigger question of beyond Miss Mason, but you know, disenfranchisement. You know, when will the laws change? Is there any consideration? I'm embarrassed to say I don't know if this is across the United States that all, you know, convicted felons can no longer vote, or so I if you could just break that down for me, because I'm so you know, I don't understand how, you know, a young white male can cross state lines to defend a property that's not his with an AK-47 and kill two people and not go to jail. But a black woman who thinks she can vote, has served her time and done what she's supposed to do, now has to go to jail for 5 years for trying to vote. I mean, it shakes me to a core, you know, to some place where I just, to your point, Sonia, you know, you start to wonder if all is lost. This is just because it just becomes such a circus and so bizarre. So I've said a lot, but I think the question is, you know, what's you know, kind of her future, and then what's the future for our incarcerated sisters and brothers.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, in New York State, if you are, what it was previously is if you were on parole, you were not able to vote. You were not able to re-register and vote. You lost your ability, you lose your right to vote when you become incarcerated with a felony or those level crimes. If you're on probation, you can vote. That's a misconception that people have. If you're on parole, before you could not vote. Now that has changed. So in New York State, individuals can vote if they're on parole. They would just have to register to vote. In other states, because each state is different, that's not the case. There are states that have gone as far as to they don't even take away your right to vote when you go to jail, when you get incarcerated. I believe a state that does that is Maine. And I think there may be one other state that has some type of similar type of process, you know, where people could actually like vote in the jails and things like that. So really it's state to state what happens. It's really unfortunate what happened to Miss Mason. I remember this Texas case happened, and I remember I think in 2018, there was another case that had happened in North Carolina. And it's like, it's a setup, you know, people are being set up to fail. And that's because we know that by far and large, we over incarcerate Black and brown people. And so just the fact that we're stripping away the rights to vote and you're no longer a citizen when you get incarcerated, and then we set traps to, you know, disproportionately arrest and incarcerate people of color. That's a problem in of itself. Yeah. And you know, once you've done your time, I'm not sure, you know, it's just horrible. But the Freedom to Vote Act, it had a provision in it that would restore rights for people who are returning home and returning citizens. Of course, it did not pass. So now each state is still left up to their own laws in their particular states. But it is unfortunate when things like that happen, and it's not fair. And that's why, you know, people get really excited about president, you know, voting for president and voting for like, you know, these really, really big elections. But a lot of times these smaller elections, Congress, US Senate, governor, mayor, and all these different things, they make a really, really big difference. There was a whole big old thing that happened in 2018, and you know, we're here again. Here we are again. It's going to be 2022, and it's a big year. It's a big election year. But like, it's going to be really hard to pass any of these very pro-voter types of laws if we don't have the political will, you know, to do it. And that's why it's so important. And that's why there's such a fight and there's such a struggle to continue to suppress and oppress people, to rip away their rights to vote, and to make sure that there's no mechanism to restore those rights. But we have to get past it. Look at what happened in Florida. In Florida, they were fighting, and then they were able to re-enfranchise people. In New York State, we were able to re-enfranchise people. I know in our office right now, you know, in our office, we have a bill before, we have a couple bills, you know, to even look at how the incarcerated population at Rikers is given access to the ballot, you know. So there are so many things that can be done on a local level to protect people's right to vote, and not just protect it with what it is, but also to expand it, you know, and we really just need to apply pressure and force our elected officials to do what's the right thing to do.
And that political will is really the part we want to keep alive. We don't want anyone to lose their vision of the fact that that power and will makes a difference. We have another question in from Malika. After this year, most maps will be finalized. Right-wing politicians will gerrymander maps and enact their extreme policies for at least a decade. How do we stop or slow it down? That's the question.
Yeah. So gerrymandering based on races technically it's illegal. We can't do that, but people can gerrymander, and they do gerrymander districts. And I can, we're seeing it already. There are multiple lawsuits happening all across the country right now because the district lines have been drawn and they're egregious. And so when we talk about stopping it, I think what we have to remind ourselves is that 1965 wasn't too long ago.
Right.
It was really, you turn around, it's right there.
That's right.
And we chip away every day. Every day we chip away. We chip away again through small elections, through getting people, first of all, getting ourselves educated, getting our neighbors educated, our families educated, getting us registered to vote. We chip away by showing up at the polls when it's necessary. We chip away by supporting individuals and elected officials who are standing for us and for the right things, for working families, for people of color. We chip away by applying public pressure. We chip away, we keep chipping and we keep chipping because we're making progress. It's right. The narrative that they want us to believe is that there is no progress. They want us to get into a place of learned helplessness where it's like, you're like this mouse trying to get out of this box and the cap is on and you keep jumping until finally you just give up and they remove the cap and you don't jump no more. We're gonna keep jumping. We're going to keep jumping. We're going to keep fighting. We will not get to a place of complacency where we have learned helplessness. All hope is not lost.
That's
right.
We
are not hopeless. We are strong. We are powerful. We are many. We just need to be a little bit more organized.
That's it.
That is all it is.
And I just want to say, when you have chance to go to those community board meetings and you're tired, you just drive up and sit in the back. You just bring 5 people and you just sit in the back with your chicken wings or whatever. You just make it a part of your nature to show up at those school board meetings, to show up anywhere that there's a conversation where the political will could be going down and you can push it back up, where you can slide in as an NCNW or NCBW member what we are hearing you say and reminding people that hope will always be alive. I love the chipping away, because if we weren't making progress, the pressure wouldn't be coming. They wouldn't be running around with 400 bills. They're terrified because that's the last card they have to play. And I think the real surprise that a Black man got into the White House freaked everybody out. And we've seen the vibrations that just couldn't stop it. So I think, to your point, we have to keep chipping away in our own way. I chip away in the little groups I'm in and try to right the wrongs and keep hope alive. It's a lot, but it's why we're here, right? It's why we made it and some of our people did not. The blood that runs through our veins is particularly strong because all the things that could have killed us, including our ancestors if they got thrown off the ship or didn't make it, but we came from the stock that made it. And so somehow you're already DNA'd, right, to be able to fight. We just need to hear more of you, because when you talk, I'm like, yes, I get the power, okay? I got it. And you got to keep passing it on, right? Which is why we want to record. We're getting close to time. We have 5 minutes left. What are the last 3 things that you want to leave sisters with? We already know we've got so much on us. We're trying to stay healthy and fit and keep our mindfulness. But what can we do, and what do we need to remember if we don't remember anything else that you said to us this evening?
If you don't remember anything else, what should you remember? I think we should remember that Black women really are the backbone, and when we show up places and we come together and we fight for things, we're successful. Right. And people are depending on us
Yes.
to be engaged. People are depending on us to stay educated and to show up when it really matters.
Yes.
And that time is coming. And so I would just encourage everyone to just keep your eyes open. And this June, you know, we have a lot going on in our own state. You know, make sure you show up. Whoever you vote for, you vote for, but make sure you show up and you know, do what you got to do. And also, and again in November, it's a very, very big year, not just in New York State, but all across the country. So
Yeah.
call the girls and tell them.
That's it. That's it. Wear your comfortable shoes, right?
Yeah.
And show up. That's it. That's half the battle. Thank you so much. We are going to keep powering up and showing up, getting our rest, keeping ourselves healthy, so that in this Black History Month, as we really pay attention to the legacy that allows us to have this free conversation in a public space, that we are so grateful for you. We're grateful for your wisdom and what empowers you each and every day. So we're going to hold you in our hearts and in the light and keep you, Xamayla, on the front of our minds, as we know you're out there, whether you're getting paid or not, in your day job and night job. We need to know where and that we have a friend. So thank you for your time and everything that you bring to this conversation from your heart that clearly is above and beyond. So we're glad you were called to this work, and know that you have friends and allies to keep moving, and you can tap into us at any time with directions. Be here, 25 of y'all at this time wearing this. We like it clean like that.
Don't tell me that, because I'll send the directions.
Yeah, when it's clean and clear, it's like, boom, we got it, right? So thank you for that, because that'll help us to get straight. I want to turn it over to my chair, Shantae. We also have my other chair, Lisa, on, but Shantae, please, can you close us out?
Yes, I would like to thank our partner, the National Council of Negro Women from the East Bronx section. And we have on the president, Sadie Davis, if she would give us a few words.
Okay. Yes, I want to thank Shantae, because she's the one who pushed this for our section. As she said, I'm the president for the National Council of Negro Women for the East Bronx section. And as most people know, we are a community-based organization. So our goals are to work in the community. And this is just another example of how the more we work together, the more powerful we are.
That's
and
right.
So my goal is that if the more of these that we can do together, I mean, it just works. So
Yes.
again, I thank you guys for allowing us to partner with you for this event.
Thank
I am
you.
totally impressed. I enjoyed the entire, event. And I thank you. And hopefully we're gonna do something else great together.
Yes. Wow. Thank you. We appreciate you so much. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. And I would also like to thank Xamayla Rose from the Deputy Public Advocate of Civic and Community Empowerment, and our moderator, Dr. Sonia Banks. We have another program coming up on March 17th called Sex, Power, Politics, and Policy, the Compelling Circumstances of Leadership, with our guest speaker, Dr. Lorraine Lee, who's a public historian. So please join us on March 17th. I would like to leave us with a few action steps. This was very, enlightening. Civic engagement is my passion. I'm also on my community board, and I like to keep people informed of local elections, like Ms. Rose said, not just the big elections, for president, right? So I would like to say we have to continue to stay civically engaged. We have to keep reading, stay informed, join groups where there are opportunities to educate others about voter engagement, and support legislation. And I think with those action steps, you know, we will get very far.
I
I'd like to
agree.
thank everybody
Yes.
and have a good night.
Good night. Ashe, everyone.
Thank
Nice
you.
to
Good night.
Take care.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.